Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Bennett, and I'm a volunteer with the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees. I would like to begin by recognizing that the Ottawa branch is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past, present, and future contributions to this land and our country. On behalf of the branch, I am pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, which is entitled The Human Face, an Essential Tool for Person Recognition. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our presenter today, Isabelle Boutet. Isabelle is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Ottawa. She researches facial recognition and how it relates to social interaction. In today's session, she'll discuss the importance of recognizing the people around us for our social interaction, and we'll share scientific studies that shed light on how humans recognize people and how aging impacts these processes. I want to give a special welcome to anybody here who is not yet a member of the association. We hope these webinars will inspire you to join us, and to our members, we hope that these webinars will encourage you to maintain your membership. If you have any questions for Isabelle, please type them in the Q&A box, and she'll be able to answer them at the end of the presentation. That's all from me, so I'll pass it over to our presenter, Isabelle.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Bonjour. Bon matin. So I'm going to be sharing a presentation now and get right into the heart of it. Just wanted to make sure that everybody can see this.
Yep, looks good.
And now it's doing something funky at my end. Just give me a moment here. I'm not sure what's going on, potentially because of this. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about basically how humans recognize faces and why it's so important for interactions. So basically, the human face is a tool for conveying social information. So when we look at a face, we extract all kinds of information regarding the person we're looking at. We extract information about the person's identity. Is this someone I'm familiar with or not? And what's their name? The lip movements that people make when they're speaking are actually unique. Based on the unique way in which your lips move, people can recognize you. Of course, facial expressions of emotions are conveyed through the face. Here, I think most of us would agree that this person looks happy. We actually also make automatic inferences about people's personality when we look at their face. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Of course, the face is used to extract information about the person's age, the person's gender, and the person's ethnicity. We also use the face to extract information about what the person is interested in. If my eyes are looking in a given direction, that tells you that I'm interested in stuff that is happening in that side of the environment. So the face is an important vector of social information. Let's go through how a little bit details through all of these. Obviously, facial features actually convey information about emotions. Specifically, it's the way in which the muscles underneath the skin of your face contract. So the muscles will contract in different ways depending on the emotion you feel. And the emotion you feel will lead to these contractions of different muscles in your face. And then an observer in the environment will look at your face and be able to make inferences about how you feel based on the contraction of the muscles in your face. So for example, we know that people who are angry, if you look at the bottom left, will have a lot of contraction in the area here of the muscles. The muscles that we use to smile are the muscles around the cheeks and the mouth. So human beings are extremely good at detecting this information from the face and at making inferences about how the person feels. There is some evidence that our ability to recognize emotions is universal. Some research done, across different parts of the world suggests that pretty much all cultures express emotions in a similar way, and then are able to decode those facial activation muscles that are associated with these different emotions. I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that we use the face to make automatic inferences about people's personality. And basically, we're going to make inferences about, is this person trustworthy? Is this person dominant? Is this person competent? Is this person warm? And we make these inferences automatically based on features of the face. So what we're seeing here is that faces that are considered from left to right, more or less competent. From left to right, more or less dominant, second row. Third row from left to right, more or less extroverted. And then finally, left to right, more or less trustworthy. If we just look, for example, at dominance, we see that features like the squareness of the chin do convey impressions that the person is more dominant. I mentioned earlier that we actually pay a lot of attention to where people are looking at. It's a form of what we call social referencing. So we're going to use this social cue to try and figure out where people are paying attention to. And because we're always, through evolution, we're always aware and on the lookout for potential threats in our environment. If, for example, a person's looking in a certain direction and shows fear in their face, we're going to interpret this as this person is feeling threatened about a certain object in the environment that is located to the left or to the right. So it's a very important cue for social interactions and for support in a social group of one human supporting another for the detection of potential threats and the transmission of information about potential threats in the environment. What I'm going to talk the most about today, though, is the use of faces for conveying information about identity. So the face is the most important tool for conveying information about who the person is. It is not the only tool. We can sometimes recognize a person by their voice, or maybe we can recognize a person by the way they walk. But the face is the most important source of information in our social interactions for recognizing who people are. Once we've identified a person as familiar, typically what we're going to try and do is remember their name. Remembering names is important, for example, for grabbing the person's attention. So people are going to say, hey, Isabelle, and then I'm going to turn around and interact with that person. Names are also important in terms of person information. Your name is an integral part of who you are, just like when people are going to be looking at you and recognizing you, they may say, okay, oh, this is Paul. And oh yeah, I remember Paul from the last National Association of Retiree meetings. Oh, and if I recall correctly, he was working in XX department at the federal government. And that's all information that is associated with the person. We call that person information. The name is part of person information. But unless we recognize the face as familiar, we're not actually going to try and retrieve this person information from our memory. And so the first step is this person familiar or not? And then the second step would be to actually retrieve information about the person. By the way, have you guys recognized these individuals? In case you haven't, we have Paul McCartney, Gérard Depardieu, Barack Obama, and Justin Trudeau. Now, you may have recognized them as familiar. You may even have been able to remember that some person is linked with movies, and another one with music, and another one with politics. And that's all part of the person information that I was talking about that we retrieve. Of all the person information we have stored in our memory that are associated with specific faces, retrieving names is actually very, very difficult. It's a big challenge. So if you're finding that you are having sometimes difficulties retrieving people's names while you're able to remember all kinds of other details about them, that's absolutely normal. I want to talk a little bit about why it is that researchers are so interested in how we distinguish the identity of a person based on their face and how we recognize people based on their face. It's actually a huge challenge for the brain, and that's one of the reasons why we've been so interested in this problem in psychology. I just want to compare face recognition to other types of recognition that occurs in our everyday life. In our everyday life, when we need to recognize objects to be able to know how to interact with them, we do this at what's called a category level. So I need to know that it's a chair so I can sit on it. I need to know that it's a dog so that I know how to interact with this object or this being. A table is something that we put things on. Garbage can is something that we'll put garbage in. And so I am able to interact with these objects at a general level. Whether the garbage can has this shape or another shape, I still know it's a garbage can, and it's enough for me to know how to interact with this garbage can. Same thing for a table. Whether the table has this shape or a slightly different shape, for example, it might be a round table, the legs might be different, the color might be different, the material might be different. It doesn't matter, because all that matters is that you're able to know that this is a table and not a chair, and therefore it is safe to put things on it. But think about having to recognize these objects at the individual level. Let's just look at dogs here. This is just an example of a breed that's called an Australian Shepherd. They actually are quite distinguishable if you compare it to other breeds because they have very particular markings in their face. But still, I think many of us, even dog lovers, would be hard pressed if we met all these dogs at the park to remember this is Parky and this is Jake and this is Franklin and so on and so forth. Yet this is what we have to do with human faces on a daily basis. And if we fail at this task, it can actually be extremely embarrassing in terms of social interactions. So what we have to do is actually recognize faces at the individual level. That's one challenge associated with face recognition. But we have to do this individual recognition despite real similarities between different faces. Look at this. All of the faces are round. All of the faces have the same features: the eyes, the nose, the mouth. The eyes are always above the nose is always above the mouth. What distinguishes one face from another are very subtle differences in this basic configuration of the face. So not only is it challenging to recognize faces at the individual level, but because faces are homogeneous stimuli, so they look pretty much the same in terms of their basic configuration, this makes the task of recognizing faces at the individual level doubly challenging. Yet humans are extremely well versed in recognizing faces. Our skills in recognizing faces are remarkable. For example, newborns can distinguish their mother's face from that of a stranger within days of being born. And there are studies that have done this to show that this can occur even if the mother's hair is hidden, for example. So we know that it's the actual face that the newborns are recognizing and not just the overall shape of the hair. We recognize faces, so make a judgment, is this face familiar or not? Have I ever seen this face or not? Very, very quickly, within 200 milliseconds. There's some research that suggests that through a lifetime, we actually can memorize and then recognize as familiar up to 5,000 faces. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it? We can also recognize faces despite changes. Some research showing that even if we haven't seen someone for 50 years, we can actually recognize them. Yet the actual appearance of the face changes drastically with aging, as we all know. Yes, our ability to recognize faces is remarkable, but it is not perfect. One weakness in the human ability to recognize faces has to do with recognizing faces from other ethnicities. There's very, very good research showing that generally people have difficulties recognizing faces of other ethnicities. So they will tend to make more errors as to whether this face is familiar or not. And if they try to retrieve person information from the face, they'll have difficulty. So they may confuse the name, they may confuse where they saw that person, and so on and so forth. Faces are also really interesting for researchers because they evoke unique phenomena. And in particular, I'm going to show you here several instances of ways in which faces are treated that are just unique to faces. No other stimuli is treated in the same way. Here we can see that we cannot ignore the external features of a face when we process the internal features of a face. For example, on the left-hand side, we cannot ignore Donald Trump's hair when we try and process Hillary Clinton's inner features, and all of a sudden she's looking like Donald Trump. Slightly older manifestation of this, it was the first time this effect was recorded in the scientific literature on the right with Al Gore and Bill Clinton. Another effect that is funny about faces is that if you turn them upside down, you really don't process them very well at all. I think most of you would agree that this is just a regular picture of Barack Obama on both sides of the panel. But if I turn the image upright, you can see that there's something awfully wrong with the panel on the left. Yet earlier, you did not see this at all when I showed you the panel upside down. So there's something really funny about the way in which we process faces upside down. Faces also evoke unique phenomena when we compare them to other types of objects. Here, what we've done is we've overlaid two faces on the left and two houses on the right. And you may right away see what's going on. On the left with the faces, what we're getting is what's called a multi-stable effect. So you see one face or the other in alternation. And your perception of these overlapping faces will alternate between one identity to the other identity. You can't really see both at the same time, and yet you're really able to group together all of the features pertaining to one identity to form a global or holistic perception of one face, and then you can shift to the other one. The experience is totally different for the houses, where we just see a scrambled mix of features, and we're really struggling to unite them into a global percept of each individual house. So now we're going to take a little interlude. I'm going to get it set up on my computer, and we're going to do a little mock study. Still all looking good? You can see the window that says interlude. Thumbs up, thank you. Okay, so what's going to happen here is you're going to participate in a mock face recognition study. And so basically you're going to be shown some faces and also other objects, one after the other. And I'm only asking you to familiarize yourself with these stimuli so that you can kind of store them in your memory, because later on I'm going to ask you to tell me whether you've seen certain faces before or not. So does that make sense? Yep, okay, let's get started. Okay, now, can you tell which of the two you've seen before? Think about it in your mind. How hard was it for you to make that decision? Now let's try it again. Again, which of the two did you see before? How hard is it for you to make that decision? How long is it taking you? Okay, let me go back to my main presentation. Most of you probably noticed that it is a little bit harder to recognize inverted than upright chairs, but it's a lot harder to recognize inverted than upright faces. And this phenomenon, which was documented, can you see what it says the screen sharing is paused? Can you see it?
It currently says interlude, take part in a study.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's try this again. I'm not sure why it didn't work. Okay, now has it shifted? Okay, good. And so, like I was saying, for most of you, you probably noticed that recognizing chairs that are turned upside down is a little harder than recognizing chairs that are upright, but recognizing faces that are turned upside down is a lot harder than recognizing faces that are upright. This phenomenon, which was documented in 1969, is called the face inversion effect. And it's a phenomenon that has been studied over and over and over again. First, we wanted to know, well, is this true for everybody? Does everybody have this experience? Do children have this experience? Do older adults have this experience? They've even asked the question, do dogs have this experience? And the answer is yes. And it's also yes for older adults and children. So how is the brain treating faces in such a way that is different from other stimuli like chairs, that it's a lot harder to process and memorize and recognize a face that's turned upside down than other types of stimuli? Why is that happening? And so that has made a lot of scientists curious to try and find an answer to this question. Let me tell you that after basically almost 50 years of this phenomenon being investigated, there's still a lot of debate as to how stable is the phenomenon, and there's still a lot of debate over the actual mechanism that could explain this phenomenon. But it just gives you a little bit of an idea of why researchers are so interested in face recognition, because of all these interesting phenomena that are associated with faces. Now, another phenomenon that has really made scientists interested in faces is what's called prosopagnosia. So what is prosopagnosia? Prosopagnosia is an inability to recognize faces. About 3% of the population suffers from prosopagnosia, and the term comes from the Greek prosopon, which means the face, and agnosis, which means not knowing. People with prosopagnosia are unable to recognize or identify people. When they look at a face, they can describe the shape of the nose, the ears, the eyes, and the cheeks. They also detect their presence. But for them, it fails to take shape or hold meaning into who this person is. In fact, the deficit is so profound that people can have difficulties recognizing themselves in the mirror. Let's have let's look at a few testimonies of people who actually have this condition. Again, give me a moment to get it all organized. And to get past the ads in YouTube. I'm hoping that the Zoom is set up to share my audio, but we'll test it right away. This is something I should have probably tested earlier. I apologize if I didn't. It skipped my mind. You can just give me a thumbs up, Paul, if you hear the sound. You don't?
Not yet. No sound yet.
Okay,
Isabelle, I think
we've got
if
it.
you,
Oh,
no, that's me, sorry.
okay.
I think if you stop the share and restart it, in the window where it asks you to share what screen to
Mhm.
share, at the bottom or somewhere on that window,
Oh
there
yeah,
should be a
share
little tick.
sound.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry I didn't think
No,
of
no
getting
problem,
that
no problem.
worked out earlier. Whoops, now I'm sharing the wrong thing. Where are we? Just give me a second here. Because I put it in full screen, it's not seeing it.
Symmetrical face. Nice teeth.
We're good now with the sound? Okay.
Do you know who this is?
I mean, she's pretty. A very symmetrical face. Nice teeth. I don't know who she is, though.
Oprah?
Oh, darn it. I know who Oprah is. Oprah's got such a distinctive voice. Who needs to recognize her face? But, yeah. Sorry about that, Oprah.
Paul knows who Oprah is, but when he sees just her face, he draws a total blank. That's because his face network, the areas of his brain responsible for facial recognition, developed atypically. It's a condition called prosopagnosia, or face blindness. It's more common than you'd think, affecting as many as 1 in 50 people. But its prevalence has only been understood in the past 20 years. And the fact that it is so little known often leads to painful misunderstandings.
Some people in my life just developed a serious dislike of me. Oh, this guy's such a jerk. We've talked several times and he never acknowledges me.
What people on the face blindness spectrum need
Now I'm going to show you another example. Another testimony. Again, skipping the ads. You can see the window here. We're good? Okay.
Several years ago, Paulette had a stroke.
Et depuis, ces plaintes concernent
Since then,
essentiellement
she has been complaining mostly
l'impossibilité
about
de
the
reconnaître
impossibility
les
of
visages
recognizing
et
faces and places.
ces troubles sont très
This is a
massifs.
very serious problem.
Et Paulette, dans la vie de tous les jours,
And in her everyday life,
a l'impression d'être
Paulette
en
constantly
permanence
has the feeling
dans une ville
she's
étrangère,
living in a foreign place among strangers.
Oui, quelquefois, mais il m'arrive de personnes qui me...
Sometimes people say hi to me, so I say hi to them. Other times I say hi to people I believe I know, and they say, who is she? What does she want? So I've been traumatized. And now I don't say hi to anybody, except when people call, hi, Paulette, or when I recognize friends from their voices.
On regarde une autre série de photographies. Quoi?
What?
I'm looking for his name.
Quel âge?
How old is he?
Over 70.
70.
Over 70, right.
He has a little mustache
Yes.
Un peu
and
inquisiteur.
inquisitive eyes with a mocking look.
Yes, perfect description.
Il a été président de la
He was
République.
president of the Republic as well.
C'est le
Général de Gaulle.
général de Gaulle.
Oh, Charles, I didn't recognize you.
Paulette can obviously see faces. She can describe them perfectly, but she can't translate those details into a flash of recognition. She suffers from prosopagnosia. The part of her brain that specializes in recognizing faces has been destroyed.
His face is familiar, but I can't put a name to it.
Well, who is he? Can you at least tell me what he does?
I think he is a singer.
Now Michel Poncet shows her a picture of himself.
Well, go ahead. Describe his face.
A little pimple on the side over there. In fact, 3 of them. I won't look any closer because he's got too many. He should go and see a skin doctor. To have his skin cleaned, because it's in bad shape. His eyes smile as well as his mouth.
Yes?
And his hair?
What about his hair?
It's quite thin.
Don't you think that's me? Don't you?
No.
How many compartments we have in our brains. She can tell everything about him.
You can see the presentation again? Yes? Okay, so there's 2 videos, give you a really good idea of what is prosopagnosia, and also imagine living your life not being able to recognize faces. The first fellow said, people think I'm a jerk. Paulette says she thinks she's in a foreign place all the time and that she's been traumatized because sometimes she makes mistakes when she's recognizing people. So you can actually see the importance of face recognition for our everyday life and our social interactions. Now, what causes prosopagnosia? So to answer that question, I'm going to take a little bit of an interlude again and give you a very basic Vision 101 to try and see how we can make sense of a condition like prosopagnosia. First of all, how do we see faces? Well, we see faces like we see anything else in our environment. And basically, there's always light in our environment. It can be provided by the sun, or it can be provided by artificial lighting. And the light in the environment actually is casted on objects, and the objects actually reflect that light. And as the objects reflect that light can be captured by our eye, and then there are special cells in our eye that will actually absorb the light. These special cells are called photoreceptors, and they're at the back of the retina of your eye, and they absorb the light, and they actually transform the light into a biological signal, into action potentials, actual electrical signals in the brain. You may know about these photoreceptors. I'm sure you've heard about them already. They're called cones and rods. Some of you may be familiar with photoreceptors because of various conditions with vision that can occur with aging. I don't want to get into any of this here, but I just want you to understand the basics of how we transform the physical information in our environment into a signal in our brain. Once the information from the environment, the light from our environment has been absorbed by the receptors in the retina, the information will then be sent through a nerve called the optic nerve to one part of the middle brain called the thalamus. That's not very important, but then it will go all the way to the back of the head to what's called the occipital lobe or the visual cortex. This is the first part of the brain that will start processing, analyzing, decoding visual information. And following the analysis of information in this first part of the brain, which is now shown on the left-hand side in yellow, the information will then move back forward into other areas, and in particular into what we call temporal areas, closer to the ears. There are 3 regions that are involved in decoding information conveyed by faces. And the region that interests us in prosopagnosia is a region that is shown here at the bottom called the FFA. Can people see that yellow dot where it says FFA? Yeah. So that's the part of the brain that is not working quite well in people who have prosopagnosia. It's a part of the brain that's actually responsible for distinguishing faces. In monkeys, there's cells in that part of the brain that are called grandmother cells, because the cell will fire if a picture of a certain monkey is shown, but not if a picture of another monkey is shown. So there are cells that fire in a selective and exclusive way for specific faces. So it's really an area of the brain that is responsible for our task of identifying faces and distinguishing faces. Now you have to realize it's pretty cool that there's a part of the brain dedicated to just that. Just the discrimination and identification of faces. Yes?
Isabelle, if I could just interrupt, there's a couple of black boxes on the screen that are interrupting the visual image. One is over processing faces, and the other one is the other ones are on the right-hand side.
Those are, yeah, I don't know. There's something going on quite strange with the, I'm going to put them at the bottom. It's they're actually the Zoom windows. It doesn't do this usually. This is what I noticed from the beginning. But anyway, let's wait to see if, I know the boxes are still there now, but are they less bothersome? Okay. Yeah, something funky is going on, like I can't use my mouse. I don't know what it is. Anyway, we'll just keep going. Are you seeing the change in the slides? Good. Yeah, the other thing is I could make that right-hand box smaller, but then I don't see you, Paul, and then I don't know if everything is going well. So I'm not going to do that. So what causes prosopagnosia was my question. Well, there's a form of prosopagnosia, the one that Paulette has, which is an acquired form following brain injury to that area that I was just talking to you a moment ago. That's called the FFA. And so if there is damage done to that area, maybe because of a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, for example, through, it could be a gun wound, it could be a car accident. If there's damage done to that area, that can lead to prosopagnosia and the inability to recognize individual faces. So I'm just showing you again this area. Here it's in French, but in blue you see the two dots showing the fusiform face area. And if that area is damaged, like I said, by a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, then you can actually have prosopagnosia and the inability to recognize individual faces. There's also, rather recently, about 20 years ago, another form of prosopagnosia that's been discovered, and it's called congenital prosopagnosia. These are actually people who are born with prosopagnosia. This form of prosopagnosia is not very well understood, but it does occur as well. And the first fellow that we saw in the video, Mark, that's the form of prosopagnosia that he has. Some people who are born with prosopagnosia are actually not even really aware about it because they've developed all kinds of compensation mechanisms to still maintain somewhat normal social interactions despite this handicap. And finally, there's also some evidence, but this is much more rare, of progressive forms of prosopagnosia linked to degenerative diseases like Alzheimer or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This is much more rare, but there are documented cases in the literature. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens as we age and how does that impact our ability to recognize faces. There's good documentation in the literature that older adults, and when we talk about older adults in science, we often talk about like 65 years old plus. I actually, having reached the 50 stage myself, don't really like this older adult 65 plus, because let me tell you, there's a lot of things that happen at 50 that, are not that different than what's going on at 65. But there's also a lot of research now showing that a lot of the things that we say are starting to kind of decline at 65 years of age, actually decline much earlier. It's just that there isn't as much research on people aged 50 to 65 because it's really hard to get working people to come into the lab to do experiments. And so to get retirees to come into the lab and do experiments is relatively easy. To get children is relatively easy. Obviously, young adults that are at university, that's pretty easy. But to get, working 50 to 65 people coming into the lab is a lot harder. So even though I'm going to be talking here at 65 plus, I do want to make it clear that some of these things I'm talking about actually occur earlier. And we're starting to understand this more now that this younger group is also being looked at. So basically, what are we talking about here when we're talking about difficulties recognizing faces? Typically, the types of errors that people will make is that strangers will seem familiar. And of course, that can be extremely embarrassing. Imagine approaching somebody in a cafe, tapping them on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, Joe, how's it going?" And then a person looks at you and say, "I don't know who you are." I say, can you imagine the embarrassment that can produce? And of course, if this is repeated over and over again, it can lead to a lot of negative emotions and eventually simply avoiding approaching people by fear of misrecognizing them. Remember during COVID, we all had a little bit of that experience with the masks, where I'm sure, I know I did, and I'm sure some of you did as well, misrecognize people that we thought we knew, but in fact we didn't because they were wearing a mask. Here, actually, the people on the left and middle panel are actually not well-known celebrities within the North American culture, in contrast with Gérard Depardieu and Justin Trudeau. But maybe you actually felt that they were familiar. And if I'd ask you, do you think you've ever seen these people before? Do you know who they are? You may have had a kind of a false sense of familiarity. And this is actually what the research shows is with aging, these are the kinds of mistakes that become more and more common. It's mistaking strangers for someone we know. Also, we know that with aging, names are becoming more difficult to find. Now, I've already told you that name finding is actually a very, very difficult task for humans. And that actually becomes even more difficult with aging. And I will not talk a lot about this in this talk, but just to kind of give you some other general information about how aging influences the decoding of faces. There's also a lot of research showing that with aging, our ability to label emotions is not quite as good if we compare older people to younger people. So that's for another talk, though, but I did want to mention it. What I've studied a while back was, okay, well, what might be causing, and we're still interested in this question, is, okay, so we know that well, first of all, we wanted to make sure that these difficulties in recognizing faces were well documented using rigorous scientific methods. So we did that. We weren't the only lab to have done this, but we wanted to confirm some kind of nitty-gritty information within the scientific world. For example, we asked the question, well, okay, older adults have difficulty recognizing faces, but do they also have difficulty recognizing other types of objects, other types of visual information? And it turns out that actually faces are very special in that with aging, face recognition is much more affected than other types of recognition. So there is something particular about aging and face recognition that occurs. So that was the first thing that we established. And then we asked, because we're scientists, we asked, well, why? Why is it that with aging, face recognition becomes more difficult? And so we look into basically, in a kind of scientific parlance, what are the mechanisms that underlie these problems with face recognition that we see in older adults? And one line of research has looked at basically problems in vision. We know that with aging, vision declines. Is it possible that this decline in vision actually contributes to poor face recognition abilities as people get older? So we do know that problems with vision is very common with aging. About 25% of people age 65 plus complain of declining vision. They actually subjectively experience a sensation that their vision is not as good. With aging, vision declines principally in two ways. One way has to do with what we call acuity. So I'm sure you recognize the chart on the left there. When you go to the optometrist, you're presented with something that looks very similar to this, but now it's done all through these more sophisticated machine, not so much these charts, although doctor's offices still use these charts. And acuity diminishes with age. What does that mean? That means that with age, we have more difficulty seeing details at a distance. So many of you, I'm sure, know this. All of a sudden you're driving and you're no longer able to read the street signs. Okay, and so this would be a manifestation of acuity diminishing with age. Another thing that happens when we age is we have more difficulty perceiving contrasts. So what are contrasts? So I'm showing you here on the right-hand side a chart that's very well known in the world of vision. If you look from the top to the bottom, we have low contrast to high contrast. So high contrast is when you have a black and white bar. And as you reduce the luminosity of one of these bars and one bar becomes more gray, now all of a sudden you have gray and white. And when you have gray and white adjacent to each other, it's a little bit harder to resolve the boundary between those two areas. And so here, if I had the mouse, it would be a bit easier, but it's not working. But as you can see at the bottom, we have very clear contrast where there's a boundary defining black and white regions. And as you go up, that boundary becomes more and more difficult to perceive, more and more difficult to resolve. Is this visible, Paul, in the shared screen? Good. And now if we go on the horizontal, it says spatial frequency low to high. Spatial frequency, this is not a perception class, so you don't need to worry about that term. But basically, if you notice on the left, the borders are larger. And on the right, where it says high, the borders are much thinner, right? Can you see that? So we go from kind of broad borders to thinner borders. Now, what happens with aging is here, what you have basically is a sense of what it is that you can resolve. So if you see borders, that means that you can perceive the contrast. If you don't see the borders, that means you can't perceive them. But there doesn't mean they're not there. It's just that you can't perceive them. So for most of you, you will see a kind of bell-shaped curve that is defining the region where you can see the borders and the region where it just looks like a uniform gray field. And it kind of looks like an inverted bell. Well, not an inverted bell, but a bell, an inverted U, I apologize. So it's a bell function and it looks a little bit like an inverted U. And what actually happens with aging is our ability to resolve contrast in the very fine lines drops. And that's another aspect of vision that declines with age. And what our research has shown is that both of these aspects of declining vision with age, acuity and the ability to resolve contrasts for fine lines, actually do contribute to difficulties in recognizing faces. Now, the good news is that these vision problems can be treated. So you should have regular visits to the optometrist. In Quebec, the majority of exams are actually covered. In Ontario, it depends on your eligibility, but you can ask your doctor or simply call the optometrist and ask and have your yearly appointment. So this is very important because we actually know that if your acuity and your contrast vision is not good, that this will make it harder for you to recognize faces. And so the advice that we're giving people is to wear their glasses or contact lenses during social interactions. We often think about wearing our glasses when we go driving so we can read street signs. But the message I want you to take from this presentation today is that failures to recognize people, errors in recognizing people are actually quite damaging in terms of your social interactions and your emotions. And for many of us, there's a simple solution to make those problems not altogether go away, but certainly to make them much less prominent, is to wear glasses. All right, so to conclude now my presentation, key takeaways. Face recognition is very important for our social interactions. They convey a wealth of social information and they allow us to recognize individuals. As we saw with the examples of people with prosopagnosia, not being able to recognize individuals can actually have profound negative effects on one's social life. Recognition errors can lead to embarrassment, negative emotions, and eventually avoidance of social contact, social situations, social interactions. Yet we know that social interactions are actually vital for our longevity. There's a lot of research that shows that social interactions are beneficial for both psychological and physical health. We know from our research that age-related vision decline contributes to face recognition difficulties. So I'm hoping that following this, if you don't have regular eye exams, that you will be more motivated to go and get your eyes examined by an optometrist, and that you will wear your glasses or contact lenses, not just when you're driving, but also when you're going to encounter other people and have social interactions at the cafe, at the museum, at a dinner party, and so on and so forth. Perhaps some of you are interested in participating in research in the Ottawa area. We are actively recruiting participants for a research study on face recognition. Research studies can involve different components. Typically, participants will sit in front of a computer monitor and look at faces. We will then ask them to recognize those faces, and they'll have to give us their response using the keyboard. In some of our studies, like you can see maybe here in the photo, there's a little camera above the computer monitor. In some of the studies, we will also use a camera to record the movement of your eyes. The studies take place at the University of Ottawa, so in downtown Ottawa. We typically recruit participants age 60 and over. Studies last 45 to 60 minutes. You are compensated for your time and for your transportation, so parking, for example. If you're interested in participating in our research studies, you can take a photo of this information, or you can ask the association to give you my contact. I didn't write my personal email here, but the association does have it. You can see that I can be contacted by phone. This is the lab email. And you can also go to our webpage. My lab is called the Scope Lab. And on the webpage, at the top, there is a option to click on Participate. And when you click on Participate, you'll be brought to a small questionnaire where you can enter your personal information, like nothing identifiable, but your email information can be entered there. And so you can be contacted by email if you're interested in participating in research studies. So thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and now I'll be ready to answer some of your questions.
Thanks very much, Isabelle, for your presentation, particularly relevant for our demographic. Let's go right into some of the questions because we have limited time, although can you go a few minutes over 11 o'clock or?
I'm available, yeah.
Great, thank you. Why is it that I have no trouble recognizing faces, but find it difficult to describe a person's features to another?
That's a very good question. It's a little bit of a long answer, but we don't recognize faces based on individual features. We actually recognize faces based on the interaction between features, and that's called like a global encoding strategy or a holistic encoding strategy. And that's one of the reasons why we have such difficulty recognizing faces upside down, actually. And so, yeah, we do not recognize faces based on the individual features. We recognize faces based on the interaction between the features, for example, the distance between the eyes and the nose and the mouth, etc. So that would probably be why it's so difficult to describe a face, not only because we don't recognize it in terms of features, but because the actual global interaction between all the features is something that's very hard to describe verbally. And it's something that's almost but however, it is something that is captured by our brain very quickly and very automatically, but we can't verbalize it. I hope that answers the question, Elaine.
All right, thank you. I have another question. I sometimes have difficulty recognizing people, even if I've met them several times, even if I've spent an evening interacting with them. Sometimes I try to notice particular aspects of their face in order to remember them. Would this be a mild form of prosopagnosia? Is there something I could do to improve recognition? I think you mentioned one thing, which was eye tests.
Yeah, so I would start there, Lori. Like, I don't know if your vision's been tested recently, but that could be like an easy kind of answer. Might you have a mild form of prosopagnosia? If you want to get in touch with us, there are ways to get this evaluated, either informally or formally. There are informal tests available on the web. I don't know if I can find it. We'll see if there's time afterwards for me to find it and share the link. But there's also, I have colleagues at the University du Québec in Ottawa who specialize in more formal assessment of prosopagnosia. The question that you're asking is very interesting, and this is where we're at now in our lab, is there anything I could do about it? And there's some research in younger adults that point to certain strategies that can be used to improve our ability to memorize faces. And while intuitively we are looking at a face and we're like, oh, I need to memorize this face. I need to pay attention to the eyes, the shape of the eyes. Oh, I need to memorize this face. I need to pay attention to the shape of the mouth or the shape of the nose. That strategy actually plays against you, is what we seem to be finding out in research studies now. Instead, what you need to do is to try and analyze the face in a kind of more global encoding strategy. So one of the things you could do instead is ask yourself, how trustworthy do I find this face? Or overall, how common does this face look? How distinctive does this face look? Or how friendly does this face look? This kind of more global judgment of the face. There's actually evidence in younger adults that these strategies can improve memorization of faces. What we're trying to do in the lab is confirm that this is also the case for older adults. So that's one of the studies that is actively ongoing in our lab. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Isabelle. Several people have commented that they have similar problems. They find your presentation very interesting and really do appreciate it. One question is, could social anxiety or other psychological disorders cause prosopagnosia?
What we know about social anxiety is it can cause other types of problems, in particular with decoding of emotion cues from faces. But as far as I know, there's no evidence that social anxiety actually makes you less able to recognize faces. Now, these studies are done in the lab. So in real world, it could act a little bit differently. So my older child has social anxiety. And because of the social anxiety, they tend to not look at faces just because they're so anxious. And of course, if you're not looking at the face, you're not going to encode that face, and you're not going to store a representation of the face in your memory. So I would say, if at all you can pull together the courage to look at the face and then deploy these strategies, asking yourself, is this face looking friendly? Is this face looking common? Then perhaps that could help.
Thank you. A question that I have is biometrics. Whether you've done any research into biometrics, whether what you've been studying has influenced what government agencies and others are doing with regard to biometrics.
So you're talking about face recognition systems?
Correct. Yeah.
There's the older face recognition system tried to incorporate mechanisms that we know occur in humans in their architecture. But current face recognition systems don't work this way. They work like basically any other artificial intelligence system, and they work on basically training. So they're trained on a large set of individuals. There are many different photos of the same individual. And it's through a training algorithm that they eventually are able to recognize faces. In terms of the best systems, for example, FaceNet is a well-known publicly available system, match or surpass humans, in particular for one aspect of face recognition, and that's the ability to recognize faces despite changes in viewpoint, despite changes in lighting, and despite changes in the expression. Because when you know somebody well, like let's say you knew me well, whether I'm presenting this or this or this or this, you could still recognize me. Or if I'm smiling or frowning, you still know it's me. And this was it took a long time for artificial face recognition systems to be able to achieve that, but now they can, and it's through these learning algorithms. So it's basically a learning algorithm that leads to that, and the best one perform very well. But there are some biases that are linked to the training set. So for example, some of the older systems, let's say, were developed in the US, and the algorithm was trained on only Caucasian faces. Then the system didn't do well at recognizing non-Caucasian faces. But those limitations have now been recognized, and like state-of-the-art systems will do quite well at recognizing faces across different ethnicities, assuming that they've been trained on those kinds of, what they call it, a face diet. So assuming that they've been trained on faces of various ethnicity. It is not my area of expertise, but it is a very, very interesting field, because a lot of research now is looking at, well, now that these systems have been trained and they do as well as humans, like, can they tell us something about how humans recognize faces? Can we use them to understand human face recognition? And so, yeah, it's an area that's very booming, I would say, in the science of face recognition.
Okay, thanks, Isabelle. We'll have to wrap up now, so I'd like to thank our audience for their participation in today's webinar, and to you, Isabelle, for this informative presentation, which has clearly struck home for a lot of people. Please look out for our follow-up email that'll contain the recording for today's session. And I believe that you will answer additional questions that come through, Isabelle?
Yeah, you can just, is it possible, Paul, in that email that you will send with the recording, to have my contact information there in that email?
Certainly, we will do that. Yeah.
Okay, I would appreciate that. So I will then be able to see if there are questions that I may be answers. If some people want to have more information on prosopagnosia screening, I can also put them in touch with colleagues that I have at UQO, or I believe that prosopagnosia test is still publicly available. I cannot find it. Oh, and there's also a publicly available questionnaire. I just realized that I could also share with the people who are interested in getting more information on prosopagnosia. And of course, if ever you're interested in participating in a study, you can use that contact, or the contact that was on the last slide of the presentation.
All right, thanks very much, Isabelle. We'll definitely share this information with participants today. Remember that you can invite non-members to attend our webinars and try us out as a guest. To register for upcoming webinars, please visit the Ottawa branch website at nafrottawa.com. Again, thank you, everyone, including Isabelle. We hope to see you next week for our renting versus owning real estate webinar with branch member Michael Fine. Thank you and goodbye.